I stood on the grand stage of the Diamond Lotus Banquet Hall, holding my 1-year-old son against my chest, feeling his small hand fisted in the fabric of my dress the way it always did when the room around him got too loud. Below me, 500 of the city's most powerful business partners and relatives had gone completely, breathlessly silent. My mother-in-law, Victoria, had just thrown a crumpled piece of paper directly into my face. It landed at my feet, unfolding slightly on the marble, and I didn't need to pick it up to know what it was. I'd known for 3 weeks. A DNA test from a clinic that didn't exist on any accredited registry, declaring a 0% probability that my husband was my son's father. She snatched the microphone from the MC's hand with the particular violence of a woman who had been waiting months for this exact moment. And her voice, amplified across the ballroom, called me a deceitful whore who had tainted their family's bloodline, demanded David throw me and my bastard out into the street where, she said, people like me belong. David didn't defend me. David didn't even look at me. He took one step back, putting distance between himself and the son he'd held proudly in front of cameras 11 months ago, his face arranging itself into an expression of betrayed disgust that I recognized with a strange, detached clarity, as the exact expression his mother had spent his entire childhood teaching him to make on command. She thought public humiliation would break me. She thought I would leave this marriage with nothing, quietly, gratefully, so David could be handed off to the daughter of a rival CEO like a piece of merchandise being returned to a better buyer. She didn't know I had intercepted her text messages to that clinic 3 weeks earlier. She didn't know I already had 3 separate court-admissible paternity tests from 3 different international hospitals sitting in a safe deposit box, each one confirming, unequivocally, that my son was David's. She didn't know I'd hired a private investigator who had spent those same 3 weeks uncovering exactly what she'd been doing with millions of dollars of her husband's corporate money. I didn't cry, I didn't defend myself. I turned my head very slightly toward the AV booth at the back of the hall and gave a single nod. But to understand how I ended up on that stage, calm in a way that terrified even me, I have to take you back 4 months. To the afternoon, I stood outside a half-open office door and heard my mother-in-law say a doctor's name like it was already an old, comfortable arrangement. I married into the Sterling family 2 years before that afternoon. And for most of those 2 years, I told myself the discomfort I felt in Victoria's presence was simply the ordinary friction of a daughter-in-law who hadn't grown up the way she had. I hadn't. My father ran a mid-sized accounting firm. My mother taught high school math. I'd met David in graduate school, both of us exhausted and unglamorous over library coffee, and I fell in love with him before I understood fully what marrying him would actually mean, not just a husband, but an entire ecosystem of old money, private clubs, and a mother who evaluated every person who entered her son's life the way an appraiser evaluates a painting she suspects might be a forgery. Victoria never said outright that she thought I wasn't good enough for David. She didn't need to. She said it in 100 smaller ways. The way she introduced me at dinners as David's wife, rather than by my name. The way she corrected my fork usage at family functions with a small, indulgent smile. The way she'd once told a room full of her friends in front of me that David had married for love, which is very sweet, very unusual for our family. I absorbed it for 2 years because I loved David. And because David, whatever his blindness toward his mother's cruelty, had never once been cruel to me himself. He was gentle. He was, in the ordinary moments of our marriage, exactly the partner I'd fallen in love with in that library. I told myself Victoria's coldness was a hurdle, not a foundation crack, something I could outlast with patience and good behavior. Everything changed the day our son was born. I don't think Victoria expected to feel the specific cold panic she felt the first time she held her grandson. A healthy, thriving proof that David's bloodline, the thing she valued above almost everything else in the world, now ran, irreversibly, through a woman she'd never approved of. A grandson meant permanence. A grandson meant I wasn't a phase David would eventually outgrow in favor of someone with the right last name. A grandson meant I was never leaving this family, not gracefully, not quietly, not on Victoria's terms. I found out months later that the same week our son turned 6 months old, Victoria had begun quietly cultivating a friendship with Amara Chen, the 24-year-old daughter of a rival logistics conglomerate CEO. Dinners, charity galas, careful photographs of David and Amara, Coincidentally, seated together at events Victoria had personally arranged the seating chart for. She wanted David divorced. She wanted him remarried to money that matched his own, and a wife whose father wasn't an accountant. There was only one obstacle standing in the way of that plan, and he had my eyes and David's stubborn chin. And he was asleep in a nursery 2 floors above the dinner where I first heard his grandmother's voice through a half-open office door, discussing him like an inconvenient line item. I'd gone looking for a phone charger, that was all. I remember the mundane, almost insulting ordinariness of it. I wasn't investigating anything, I wasn't suspicious of anything specific. I was simply walking down a hallway in my in-laws' house looking for a charging cable, and Victoria's office door was open 3 inches, and her voice, low and businesslike in a way I'd never heard her use before, stopped me cold in the hallway before I even understood why. "Doctor, Halloran can have the results ready within the week," she was saying. "I don't care what the actual test shows, I need the paperwork to say 0% probability. You said he's done this before for other families." A pause, a man's voice on speakerphone, muffled, indistinct. "The money isn't a problem," Victoria said. 50,000 wired the same day I have the document in my hands. I need it to look legitimate enough to hold up in a room full of people who will want to believe it the moment they see it. I stood in that hallway with a phone charger dangling from my hand, my heart doing something violent and silent in my chest. And I understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once instead of gradually, that my mother-in-law was buying a lie specifically engineered to destroy my marriage, my reputation, and my son's legitimacy in the eyes of everyone who mattered to this family. I didn't confront her. Some instinct, sharper than my own outrage, told me confrontation would accomplish nothing except giving her time to build a better story before she needed one. I backed away from that door as quietly as I'd approached it, and I didn't sleep that night, lying awake beside David, running through every possible version of what came next. I thought at first that I would simply tell him. Surely, I reasoned in the dark, exhausted logic of 3 in the morning, surely a man would believe his wife over a forged document, once he understood what his mother had actually done. But I'd watched David with Victoria for 2 years by then. I'd watched him defer to her on decisions as small as which restaurant to book, and as large as which private school to consider. Watched him absorb her opinions about me with a pliant, unquestioning ease that used to make me tell myself he was simply a devoted son, before I understood it for what it actually was. A lifetime of conditioning so complete that David didn't experience Victoria's judgment as an outside opinion at all. He experienced it as fact, the same unquestioned category as gravity or weather. If Victoria handed him a document with an official letterhead and a doctor's signature, David would believe it before he believed me. Not because he didn't love me, because he had never, in 30 years, developed the internal architecture required to disbelieve his mother. I understood, lying awake that night with my son's monitor glowing faintly on the nightstand, that I wasn't fighting Victoria's lie. I was fighting 30 years of programming, and a lie alone was never going to be enough proof to overcome it. I would need something Victoria couldn't argue with. Something so absolute, so triple verified, so publicly undeniable that even a lifetime of conditioning would have nowhere left to hide. I got up before dawn the next morning, kissed my sleeping son's forehead, and started making a list of the top paternity testing facilities in 3 different countries. If Victoria wanted to fight with forged paper, I was going to answer with proof no court, no doctor, and no amount of maternal manipulation could ever touch. The first DNA test was drawn 6 days after I stood outside Victoria's office door, at a private genetics laboratory 2 states away, chosen specifically because it had no institutional relationship with any hospital the Sterling family had ever donated to, no board member who might owe Victoria a favor, no possible point of compromise she could reach if she ever tried. I told David I was taking our son to visit my sister. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did visit my sister the day after, and I let her hold my son while I sat at her kitchen table and cried for the first time since I'd heard Victoria's voice through that half-open door. Cried in the specific, private way you cry when you can't afford to do it anywhere your enemies might see. The second test came from an international facility in Geneva, arranged through a colleague of my father's who specialized in cross-border legal documentation, chosen because Swiss chain of custody standards were, my father's colleague assured me, essentially impossible to challenge in any court on earth. The third, quieter and closer to home, came from a university hospital's genetics department, a facility that ran paternity testing purely for academic research purposes and had never, in its history, been involved in a single contested family case that might connect it to anyone in Victoria's orbit. 3 tests, 3 continents worth of legal standards. 3 results arriving over the following 2 weeks, each one a formal document with a raised seal and a laboratory director's signature. Each one stating, with the flat, unambiguous authority of hard science, a 99.99% probability of paternity. I put them in a safe deposit box at a bank Victoria had never once mentioned, under a rental agreement in my maiden name. And I felt, closing that small steel drawer for the first time, something shift permanently in my chest. Not relief exactly, not yet, but the specific, grounding calm of a woman who finally had solid ground to stand on, even if nobody around her knew it yet. The marriage, in every way that mattered, was already over. I understood that with total clarity even as I continued sleeping beside David every night, continued making his coffee every morning, continued performing a domestic normalcy that had become, almost overnight, a kind of theater I was staging entirely for Victoria's benefit. I needed her to believe nothing had changed. I needed David to notice nothing different in my behavior that might make its way back to his mother as a warning. It was during this strange, suspended period, grieving a marriage that hadn't technically ended yet, gathering financial documents for a divorce I hadn't yet filed, that I found the second thread entirely by accident, the way the truest, most damning discoveries always seem to arrive. I managed a portion of the Sterling family's corporate accounts, a responsibility Victoria's husband, Richard, had handed me 2 years earlier with the offhand confidence of a man who trusted his son's wife more, in some ways, than he trusted his own increasingly distracted spouse. It was meant to be a courtesy role, light oversight, quarterly reconciliation reports that mostly rubber-stamped work the company's actual accounting department had already done. I was pulling those reports together for my own divorce preparation. I needed a clear picture of the family's total assets before I walked into any lawyer's office. When I noticed a pattern in the discretionary spending accounts that didn't match anything I remembered approving. A series of wire transfers, each one just under the internal reporting threshold that would have triggered automatic board review, moving out of a corporate account Victoria had sole signing authority over, into an account belonging to something called Meridian Wellness Consulting, LLC. I looked up Meridian Wellness Consulting out of nothing more than idle curiosity at first. It took less than 10 minutes to find its sole listed officer, a 22-year-old personal trainer named Tyler Voss, whose public social media accounts showed, among other things, a rented penthouse apartment, a leased sports car, and a lifestyle entirely disproportionate to anything a personal training business could plausibly support. I hired a private investigator the same afternoon. His name was Marcus Delgado, a former financial crimes detective who'd left the department to do exactly this kind of work. And I told him, when we met, precisely 2 things. I needed everything he could legally document about Meridian Wellness Consulting's relationship to Victoria Sterling, and I needed it fast, discreet, and airtight enough to survive a lawyer's cross-examination. It took him 11 days. He came back with a folder I still remember the weight of physically in my hands, thick, organized, tabbed with the meticulous precision of a man who'd spent a career making sure evidence held up in rooms full of people paid to tear it apart. "She's better at this than most people I investigate," Delgado told me, sliding the folder across the small table at the coffee shop we'd chosen specifically because neither of us had ever been there before. Separate phone. Cash withdrawals broken into amounts small enough to avoid automatic reporting. A rented apartment under an LLC instead of her own name. But she made one mistake almost everyone in her position makes eventually. "What's that?" I said. "She got comfortable," he said. "The wire transfers started small 18 months ago, 10,000 here, 15 there. But the last 4 months they've scaled up fast. She's moved almost $2.1 million into accounts connected to Mr. Voss. People who are careful for a long time tend to get sloppy right around the point. They think they've gotten away with it." He opened the folder. Bank statements, cross-referenced and highlighted. Hotel security footage stills, time-stamped, showing Victoria, unmistakably Victoria, in a coat I recognized from a family Christmas photo, entering a downtown hotel with Tyler Voss on 4 separate occasions over the past 2 months. Property records for the penthouse apartment. Its lease signed by Meridian Wellness Consulting LLC. Its actual occupant listed on the building's own internal directory as T. Voss, guest of VS. There's more, Delgado said. I pulled the corporate compliance filings. The money she's moving isn't just discretionary spending, she's entitled to as an officer of the company. A significant portion is coming out of accounts earmarked for the family's charitable foundation, money donated by other people, for causes that no longer exist in any meaningful sense, because your mother-in-law has been quietly redirecting it into her boyfriend's lifestyle for going on a year and a half. I sat with that folder open in front of me for a long time, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite fury, some third thing that lived in the space between them. The specific, clarifying rage of watching a woman who'd spent 2 years judging my worthiness by my last name, and my table manners turn out to be embezzling from charities to fund an affair with a man not much older than the son she was trying to marry off to old money. Victoria, who had called me a moral stain on her family's bloodline over a lie she'd paid $50,000 to manufacture, was quietly stealing from cancer research funds to keep a 22-year-old in a penthouse. I photographed every document. I backed the entire folder up in 3 separate locations, the same triple redundancy instinct that had guided the DNA tests, because I had learned in the span of 1 devastating month that a single piece of proof was always vulnerable to being lost, discredited, or explained away. 3 was defensible. 3 was I was beginning to understand the exact number of anything I would ever again trust to carry the full weight of my life. I didn't confront Victoria. I didn't tell David. I let the marriage continue its quiet, hollow performance for another 6 weeks, while behind the scenes I built a second folder to sit beside the first. The DNA results proving my innocence, and the financial and video evidence proving Victoria's. 2 weapons, 2 entirely separate cases. And somewhere in the middle of that 6 weeks, an invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock, embossed in gold, for a first birthday party at the Diamond Lotus Banquet Hall, 500 guests. A celebration befitting the Sterling family's newest generation. I knew, reading it, precisely what Victoria intended to turn that celebration into. I RSVP'd yes, and began quietly coordinating with an AV technician I'd hired under a name that meant nothing to anyone in that ballroom, to make absolutely certain that whatever screen Victoria intended to use to destroy me would, at exactly the right moment, belong entirely to me instead. The morning of the party, Victoria called me twice, once to confirm the color of the dress I planned to wear. For the photographs, she said, in a tone so warm it would have fooled anyone who hadn't heard her voice through a half-open office door 6 weeks earlier, and once to remind me with elaborate casualness that so many important people would be there: David's business partners, potential investors, 3 separate members of the city council, Amara Chen and her father among them, seated. Victoria mentioned, right up front, where David can properly introduce them. I said all the right things. I thanked her for her thoughtfulness. I hung up the phone and sat very still in my son's nursery for a long moment, watching him nap, understanding with total clarity that I was watching a woman set an elaborate table for my own public execution, and asking me to help her pick the tablecloth. The Diamond Lotus Banquet Hall had been transformed into something closer to a coronation than a first birthday party. A 12-foot ice sculpture of the family crest, a 5-tier cake trimmed in real gold leaf, a string quartet playing in the corner while 500 guests in evening wear circulated beneath crystal chandeliers. And at the center of it all, a raised stage with a podium, a microphone, and a massive LED screen positioned behind it, ostensibly ready to play a photo montage of my son's first year. I had arranged, 3 days earlier, for my own AV technician, a quiet, unassuming man named Priya's cousin, hired through a staffing agency with no connection whatsoever to the Sterling family's usual event vendors, to be embedded on the venue's technical crew, ostensibly as additional support for a party of this scale. He knew exactly one thing. When I gave a specific signal, a slow nod toward the booth, he was to override whatever the scheduled program showed and play the file I'd given him instead. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a pale blue dress Victoria had specifically approved over the phone, holding my son in a soft cream romper she'd also approved, understanding that every detail she controlled today was a detail she'd use later as evidence of how carefully, how normally, everything had been proceeding right up until the moment I revealed myself. The party moved exactly the way I'd expected it to for the first 90 minutes, cocktail hour. Canapés, the kind of glittering small talk that always accompanies extremely wealthy people pretending to be interested in each other's children. David stayed close to me for most of it, his hand at the small of my back, playing the part of proud father with an ease that almost made me forget what I already knew about the limits of his loyalty. Almost. At 6:30, the MC called the room to attention for the toast. I climbed the small staircase to the stage with my son on my hip, David beside me, Victoria and Richard taking their positions at the podium's other side. 500 faces turning toward us in the expectant hush of a room waiting for something sentimental. Victoria took the microphone first. That should have told me, if I hadn't already known, exactly what was coming. Grandmothers rarely insist on speaking before the parents unless they have something specific they intend to control. 1 year ago, she began, her voice warm, practiced, carrying easily across the ballroom, our family was blessed with the arrival of our first grandchild. A moment of such joy, such hope for the future of everything the sterling name represents. She paused. I felt David's hand tense briefly against my back, and I understood in that half-second that he already knew what was coming too, that he had known on some level for longer than I wanted to consider, and had simply chosen, the way he always chose, to let his mother's plan unfold rather than stop it. But joy, Victoria continued, her voice shifting, hardening, should never be built on a lie. She reached into the small clutch she was carrying and withdrew a single folded sheet of paper, and I watched 500 faces lean subtly forward, sensing, with the particular hunger of the very wealthy for someone else's scandal, that they were about to witness something they'd be discussing for months. I have spent the last several weeks, Victoria said, confirming something I prayed I was wrong about. I wasn't. She unfolded the paper, held it up, and threw it, not handed it, threw it directly at my face. It struck my cheek and fell to the stage floor at my feet, and I heard from the audience a collective, indrawn gasp, 500 people recognizing the shape of a scandal even before they understood its contents. That, Victoria said, her voice climbing now, rising into the register of theatrical grief she'd clearly rehearsed, is a paternity test. 0% probability that my son is that child's father. This woman, she turned to me, her face arranged into an expression of betrayed devastation, has spent 2 years deceiving this family, tainting our bloodline, making my son raise another man's bastard while pretending. That's enough, I said quietly, not because I expected it to stop her, but because I needed, for the record that existed only in my own memory, to have said something. It didn't stop her. Nothing was going to stop her. She had built this moment too carefully, invited too many witnesses, invested too much in its theater to abandon it now for anything as small as my objection. David, she said, turning to her son, her voice cracking with performed heartbreak, you deserve so much better than a woman who would do this to you, to us. I raised you better than to let someone like this destroy everything our family has built. I turned to David. I watched him look at me, really look at me, for what felt like the first time in weeks, and I watched him take a step backward instead of forward, his face arranging itself into the exact expression of betrayed, disgust his mother had spent 30 years training him to produce on command. David, I said, my voice steadier than I had any right to expect it to be. You know me, you know this is a lie. How could you, he said, and his voice was shaking, but not, I understood in that moment with total, devastating clarity, shaking with doubt. Shaking with the particular relief of a man who had just been handed permission to do something he'd apparently wanted to do for a long time, dressed up as righteous betrayal instead of the cowardice it actually was. A year, Clara. A year of lying to my face, letting me hold him, letting me. I want her out, Victoria said into the microphone, her voice carrying final, absolute, playing to the room now more than to me. Out of this hall, out of this family, out of David's life. She gets nothing, not 1 cent. Not after this. I looked out at the ballroom. 500 faces, some horrified, some already whispering to their neighbors, a few. I noted this with a distant, clinical part of my mind that had nothing left in it that could still be wounded by cruelty, already reaching for their phones, already beginning to film. David didn't look at me again. He stepped further away, putting visible, deliberate distance between himself and both of us, his son included, and said to the room in a voice that cracked but didn't waver, "She gets nothing in the divorce." Nothing. I stood alone on that stage, my son's small fist curled tight in the fabric of my dress, 500 strangers' judgment settling over me like weather, and I let it. I let every second of it land, unopposed, uncontested, because I understood something Victoria and David didn't yet, that every word they'd just said, in front of 500 witnesses, 3 council members and at least a dozen phones already recording, was a door slamming permanently shut behind them. They had committed publicly, completely, irreversibly to a lie. There was no walking it back now, not after this. I turned my head slowly away from David's retreating back, away from Victoria's triumphant, tear-streaked face, toward the AV booth at the rear of the ballroom, where a man I'd hired under a name that meant nothing to any of them stood exactly where I'd asked him to stand, watching me, waiting. I nodded once. The massive LED screen behind the podium flickered once, and the photo montage everyone had been expecting, soft, focused baby pictures set to gentle piano music, never appeared. Instead, the screen filled in crystal-clear 4,000-pixel resolution, with hotel security footage timestamped 6 weeks earlier. Victoria, unmistakably Victoria, in the same charcoal coat she'd worn to a family Christmas photo 18 months before, standing in a hotel elevator with Tyler Voss, 22 years old, kissing him with an urgency that left absolutely nothing to the room's imagination. The gasp that moved through the ballroom this time wasn't the polite, hungry gasp of an audience anticipating scandal. It was something rawer, 500 people recoiling in real time from something they couldn't unsee. The string quartet in the corner grinding to a confused, discordant halt as the musicians themselves turned to look at the screen. The footage cut seamlessly, exactly the way I'd instructed my technician to sequence it, into a second file: bank statements, highlighted line by line. Wire transfers moving out of Sterling Family Charitable Foundation accounts into Meridian Wellness Consulting LLC, $2.1 million over 18 months. The recipient's property records overlaid beside footage of the leased penthouse apartment. Its actual occupant listed plainly as T. Voss, guest of VS. "That woman," I said into the second microphone, the one built into the podium David had abandoned, my voice carrying clean and level across a room that had gone utterly, shatteringly silent, just accused me of tainting this family's bloodline. She did it while embezzling over $2 million in charitable donations, money given by people in this very room, for cancer research, for children's hospitals, for causes she stood on stages exactly like this one and pretended to care about, to fund an affair with a 22-year-old she's been paying to live in a penthouse 3 miles from here. Victoria's face, still turned toward the audience in the frozen half-second of her interrupted triumph, went through a transformation I will remember for the rest of my life, the theatrical grief draining out of it in real time, replaced by something closer to raw animal panic as she turned, too slowly, to see what the entire room was already staring at behind her. "Turn it off," she said, her voice cracking, no longer performing anything. "Turn that off right now." Nobody moved to turn it off. Nobody in that ballroom worked for her anymore, not in any way that mattered, not after what they'd just watched. Richard, my father-in-law, a man I had exchanged perhaps 200 words with in 2 years of marriage, a man whose emotional register I had genuinely believed was limited to golf commentary and quiet approval of whatever Victoria decided, moved across that stage with a speed I wouldn't have believed him capable of, his face gone a deep, dangerous shade of purple I'd never seen on him before. $2 million, he said, and his voice, when it finally broke loose, was a roar that silenced whatever murmuring had started to rise in the ballroom. $2 million of asterisk my asterisk company's money, Victoria, for that. He gestured violently at the screen, still playing, still showing Tyler Voss's leased sports car, His rented lifestyle, receipt after receipt of Victoria's money keeping him in a life he hadn't earned a single dollar of. The slap, when it came, happened too fast for anyone to intervene. Richard's open palm connecting with Victoria's face with a crack that carried obscenely through the still live microphone at the podium, sending her stumbling backward directly into the 5-tier birthday cake. Gold leaf and buttercream and shattered fondant collapsing around her in a spectacle no camera in that room, and there were now dozens filming, was going to miss. I didn't wait to watch her fall. I turned instead to David, who stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his face doing something complicated and horrified as he watched his entire family's architecture collapse in real time in front of the exact 500 witnesses his mother had assembled to destroy me. I reached into the small bag I'd carried onto that stage, the same bag I'd carried through 90 minutes of cocktail hour, through Victoria's approving glance at my pale blue dress, through every moment of a party I'd known for 6 weeks would end exactly like this, and withdrew a sealed folder. I dropped it onto David's chest. He caught it reflexively, his hands shaking. 3 DNA tests, I said, my voice carrying clean and final, across a ballroom that had gone almost perfectly silent except for Victoria's muffled, humiliated sobbing somewhere behind me in the wreckage of the cake. 3 separate hospitals, 3 continents, 3 legal chains of custody, all confirming what I already knew and what you refused to believe. That boy is your son. 99.99% probability. I had them the same week your mother started planning this party. I watched something break open in David's face. Not relief, not yet. Something closer to horror at the size of what he'd just done. Standing on a stage in front of everyone who mattered to his professional life. Having just publicly disowned his own son over a document his mother paid $50,000 to forge. Clara, he started. I didn't. You didn't ask me, I said. You didn't wait. You didn't defend me or him for 1 single second in front of 500 people because 30 years of your mother's programming mattered more to you than 1 year of knowing me. I shifted my son slightly against my hip, and he looked at David with the wide, uncomprehending curiosity of a child too young to understand what he just witnessed, and something in that small, innocent look seemed to land on David harder than anything I'd said. I already have the divorce decree drafted, full custody. Alimony calculated against the full corporate valuation, not whatever number your family's lawyers would have tried to lowball me with. And given what's currently playing behind you, and what your father just did in front of 3 city council members and half the business press in this city, I don't think your family's lawyers are going to have much leverage left to negotiate with. I didn't wait for his answer. There wasn't going to be one worth hearing. I turned my back on the stage, on Victoria, still collapsed in the ruined cake, on Richard breathing hard, his hands still raised, on David standing frozen with a folder of DNA results shaking in his hands, and a ballroom full of witnesses who would be discussing this moment at every dinner party in the city for the next decade. And I walked down the small staircase, through a crowd that parted for me with a strange, stunned reverence, my son's face pressed against my shoulder, his small hand still fisted in the fabric of my dress. Behind me, the chaos continued to unravel exactly the way I'd known it would once the truth finally outweighed the lie. Victoria's sobbing, Richard's fury, David's stunned, useless silence, 3 council members already quietly excusing themselves toward the exits. A business reporter I recognized from the local paper typing rapidly into her phone. I didn't look back once. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean, and I stood on the front steps of the Diamond Lotus banquet hall with my son in my arms, feeling, for the first time in 6 weeks of careful, patient planning, the full weight of it finally settle into something that felt unmistakably like peace. The divorce settlement, finalized 4 months later, gave me full custody, an alimony arrangement that left the Sterling family's lawyers with almost nothing to argue about given the public spectacle, and the embezzlement charges Richard himself insisted on pursuing against his own wife, and a settlement large enough that I never again had to worry about anyone questioning where I belonged in any room I chose to walk into. Victoria's reputation didn't survive the video. Neither, in any meaningful sense, did her marriage. Richard filed for divorce himself within the month, unwilling to remain married to a woman who had stolen from cancer research to fund an affair with a man young enough to be their son. David, stripped of his mother's constant architecture, seemed, in the rare updates I heard through mutual acquaintances, to be a smaller, quieter man than he'd been, still trying to understand how 30 years of unquestioning obedience had cost him almost everything that had actually mattered. I never spoke to any of them again. I carried my son down the front steps into a car that was mine, toward a life that was entirely, finally, my own. And I didn't feel the need to look back at the wreckage behind me even once. I had already seen everything I needed to see.